Hey guys, tonight we begin with something slightly less mathematical, but arguably more useful if you ever find yourself without electricity, running water, or an understanding of modern plumbing. Medieval survival techniques. Picture this. You're standing in a thatched cottage somewhere in 13th century England, the wind howling through gaps in the wattle and daub walls, and your smartphone is nothing but a useless rectangle because, well, it hasn't been invented yet. The fire in your hearth is literally the difference between life and death. Your next meal depends on techniques that would make a modern prepper weep with envy, and you probably won't survive this winter without knowledge that our ancestors considered as basic as breathing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, possibly while hoarding beans. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in your medieval home as the first pale light filters through the shutters. The fire has died to glowing embers, and you shiver as your feet touch the cold earthen floor. Today you must travel to the next village to trade your pottery for grain. A journey that will take you through dense forest and across exposed moorland. But here's the thing that would absolutely baffle a modern camper. You're not packing a lighter, matches, or even flint and steel. Instead, you're preparing something called a portable fire bundle, and it's about to become your best friend for the next 3 days. The medieval portable fire bundle was essentially a Zippo lighter. If that lighter was slow, smelled like sheep, and could burn your entire cart down if handled badly. You begin by taking a glowing ember from your hearth, typically charcoal because it burns slower and more predictably than wood. This ember, about the size of a walnut, is still radiating heat that could sear your fingertips if you're careless. You wrap it carefully inside dried moss, fungus, or punkwood, materials that smolder rather than burst into flame. The container matters enormously. You might use a hollowed-out horn from a sheep or cow, which naturally resists heat, or a specially treated leather pouch lined with clay. Some clever souls even used iron boxes with tight-fitting lids, though these were expensive and heavy. The key is creating an environment where your ember can breathe just enough to stay alive, but not enough to consume its fuel too quickly. Historians still argue whether the saltpeter treatments mentioned in some manuscripts actually extended burn time or were just medieval placebo effects. But what's certain is that a well-prepared fire bundle could smolder for 12 to 20 hours. Imagine carrying a living piece of fire in your pocket, knowing that with just a puff of breath and some dry tinder, you could conjure flames anywhere, anytime. You pack your bundle with the same care a modern person might reserve for their passport and wallet. The moss is bone dry, gathered from the north side of oak trees, where it grows thick and spongy. You've mixed in a bit of charred linen, cloth that's been burned but not consumed, creating a material that catches flame from the smallest spark. Some people added animal fat to the mixture, which sounds disgusting, but actually helped the bundle burn longer and more reliably. The weight in your leather satchel is barely noticeable, but its value is immeasurable. Fire-making was notoriously fickle, especially if your tinder got damp or your hands were frozen into sad little claws. Striking sparks from flint and steel could take 30 minutes of frustrating work, assuming you even had steel, which many people didn't. Carrying fire meant you could walk into a clearing, build a shelter, unpack your moss-wrapped miracle, and with a puff of breath and a prayer to whoever watched over traveling potters, have flames ready for soup, warmth, or dramatic shadow puppet storytelling. As you shoulder your pack and step into the morning mist, you pass your neighbor Gerald loading his own cart. He eyes your fire bundle with approval. Everyone knows the wisdom of carrying flame. You could even hand one to a neighbor on their way to market, literally passing the torch, because no one wanted to be the guy begging for fire at dusk. That was socially awkward, and occasionally met with responses like, "Should have packed your moss, Gerald." The morning air is crisp against your face as you begin walking, and you can feel the gentle warmth of your fire bundle through the leather. It's alive in there, breathing slowly, waiting. This isn't just survival technology. It's a relationship with fire that modern people have completely lost. You're not just carrying flame, you're carrying possibility, security, and the difference between a comfortable evening and a potentially fatal night. The path ahead winds through countryside dotted with other travelers, each carrying their own precious cargo of smoldering hope, each one a walking testament to medieval ingenuity that would make our modern, instant everything world pause and reconsider what convenience actually means. The scent of wood smoke drifts from your cottage chimney as you return from the market 3 days later, but something's off. The smoke smells different, richer, meatier, almost like bacon. Your neighbor Gerald pauses his own cart and sniffs the air suspiciously. "Smells like you've got quite the feast going," he says with that tone people use when they're fishing for an invitation. You just smile and shrug. Must be the wind carrying smoke from the next village over. What Gerald doesn't know, what nobody in your village knows, is that hanging in the rafters behind your fireplace, wrapped in the slow, cool smoke that drifts up from your hearth, is half a pig that's been quietly transforming into medieval survival food for the past 6 weeks. You've just mastered one of the most ingenious preservation techniques of the Middle Ages: hidden meat smoking. See, most people today think of smoking meat as something you do with a grill, a beer, and mild barbecue delusions. But in medieval times, smoke wasn't for flavor, it was for survival. And not just any smoke. This was strategic, sneaky, hidden smoke. While fantasy movies show great hunks of meat hanging proudly above roaring fires, the reality was far more subtle and, frankly, more paranoid. In your cottage, like most homes with open hearths, the meat isn't displayed where everyone can see it. Instead, it's tucked high up in the rafters behind the fire, out of reach from animals, children, and that one neighbor who always seems to show up at dinner time. Why behind the fire? Because that's where the cool smoke drifted, slow and steady, rising through the house and wrapping itself around whatever unfortunate chicken or pig part you'd managed to obtain. Historians still argue whether this positioning was intentional stealth or just practical space management, but the results were undeniably clever. Over days, weeks, and even months, the smoke would dry the meat, kill off bacteria, repel insects, and make sure your ham survived longer than your New Year's optimism. This wasn't your sweet applewood barbecue kind of smoke either. This was pine and despair smoke, thick, acrid, and full of character that would make a modern pitmaster weep. You climb the wooden ladder to check your hidden treasure. The meat has darkened to a deep mahogany color, hard as leather but still flexible. When you press it with your thumb, it barely gives. Perfect. After a few months of this treatment, the meat becomes virtually indestructible, armed against decay, bugs, and relatives dropping in unexpectedly. It's like jerky's tougher, more antisocial older brother. The beauty of hidden smoking wasn't just preservation, it was security. That matters when you live in a village where "I didn't see your sausage hanging there" is somehow a legal defense. Visible meat was vulnerable meat. Thieves, tax collectors, and hungry neighbors all posed threats to your winter protein supply. But meat, hidden in the smoke? That was your secret insurance policy against starvation. Even better, while the meat smoked, your house stayed warm and pest-resistant. Nothing says cozy medieval evening like sitting under a smoldering ham in a room filled with smoke and hope. The same fire that cooked your daily meals was slowly creating your emergency food supply. It was multitasking at its finest, medieval meal prep that would make modern efficiency experts jealous. You descend the ladder and tend to your evening fire, adding just enough green wood to keep the smoke flowing steadily upward. The technique requires patience and attention. Too much heat, and you'd cook the meat instead of preserving it. Too little smoke and bacteria could take hold. But get it just right, and you'd have protein that could last through the harshest winter or the longest siege. Gerald's cart creaks past your window again, and you wave cheerfully. He's probably wondering why your chimney smoke always smells so interesting. What he doesn't realize is that you're not just heating your home, you're operating a medieval food laboratory, using techniques that predate refrigeration by centuries and surpass it in some ways. No electricity required, no moving parts to break, and if the apocalypse comes, you'll be the one with the bacon. The fire settles into its evening rhythm, sending lazy tendrils of smoke up toward your hidden meat treasury. Tomorrow, you'll add another chicken to the collection. By next month, you'll have enough preserved protein to trade, share, or simply survive on when the harvest fails or the tax collectors get too greedy. And all of it happening right under everyone's noses. Or rather, right above everyone's noses, hidden in plain sight, where the smoke tells its own delicious lies. Your neighbor Gerald is having problems again. You can hear him from 3 cottages away, yelling at his goats who've somehow escaped their pen and are now enthusiastically destroying his cabbage patch. "Get back here, you devil's spawn!" he shouts, chasing after a particularly rebellious billy goat that seems to be grinning as it tramples his winter vegetables. Meanwhile, you're sitting peacefully in your own garden, watching your livestock graze contentedly within the confines of something that would absolutely blow Gerald's mind: a living fence. What surrounds your property isn't wood, stone, or any material that required chopping, quarrying, or paying a carpenter. Instead, you're protected by a barrier that literally grew itself. A dense, thorny, impenetrable wall of hawthorn, blackthorn, and willow that's been carefully trained, bent, and woven into what medieval folks called a hedgerow. And the best part? It gets stronger every year, while Gerald's wooden fence rots a little more each winter. You planted your hedgerow 5 years ago, starting with saplings no thicker than your thumb. The technique, passed down from your grandfather, required patience that would challenge a modern person's sanity. Fast-growing, bendy trees like willow, hawthorn, hazel, and blackthorn were planted close together, closer than trees would naturally grow. As they sprouted upward like overachieving weeds, you didn't just let them shoot skyward. No, you bent, wove, and interlaced the branches into a thick, snarling hedge that could stop a pig, redirect a goose, and absolutely ruin a thief's evening. The process is called laying the hedge, and it's part art, part science, and part controlled violence against vegetation. You partially cut through the trunks, not enough to kill them, but enough to make them flexible. Then you bend these half-severed trees sideways, weaving them between upright posts and other laid branches. It sounds brutal, but the trees respond by sending up new shoots from every bend and cut, creating an increasingly dense barrier. Historians still argue whether hedgerow techniques were developed independently across Europe or spread through trade routes. But what's undeniable is their effectiveness. Your hedgerow isn't just a fence, it's a fortress that gets more impenetrable with time. Unlike wooden fences that rot, collapse, and invite every carpenter in town to give you a quote, hedgerows become thicker, denser, and more aggressive each year. You walk along your property line, inspecting the growth. Where you laid the hawthorn 3 years ago, the original bent trunk has sent up dozens of new shoots, creating a barrier so thick you can barely see through it. The blackthorn section is particularly satisfying. Those thorns aren't just decoration, they're genuine weapons. Anyone trying to push through would emerge looking like they'd been wrestling with an angry porcupine. But your living fence serves multiple roles that would make modern landscapers weep with envy. Birds nest in the dense branches, creating a natural pest control system that keeps your vegetables bug-free. Bees and other pollinators love the hawthorn flowers, improving your garden's productivity. The roots prevent soil erosion, holding your hillside together during heavy rains. It's like having a medieval multi-tool. If your multi-tool had thorns, bees, and the occasional hidden ferret. The hedge also provides food. Hawthorn berries, blackthorn sloes, and hazelnuts all grow within your living wall. You're not just maintaining a boundary, you're cultivating a larder. In lean times, these hedgerow fruits and nuts could mean the difference between hunger and survival. Gerald, meanwhile, gets nothing from his wooden fence except splinters and an annual carpentry bill. You pause at the corner where your hedgerow meets the road. Here the growth is particularly impressive. A solid wall of green that stands 8 feet tall and 4 feet thick. Travelers often stop to admire it, asking how you managed to create such an effective barrier. You just smile and say it's an old family secret, which is technically true. The secret is patience, knowledge, and understanding that sometimes the best solutions grow themselves. From inside your garden, you can hear Gerald still chasing his escaped livestock. His wooden fence, built just 2 years ago, already shows signs of weather damage. The posts are starting to lean, and you noticed yesterday that one of the rails has cracked. Give it another year or two, and he'll be back to arguing with carpenters about replacement costs. Your hedgerow, meanwhile, is just hitting its stride. Some hedgerows still visible in England today are over 700 years old, meaning they've outlived wars, kings, and several attempts at Brexit. They're living testaments to medieval innovation, boundaries that didn't just mark property lines, but created ecosystems, provided food, and generated their own defenses. You head back toward your cottage, confident in your green fortress. Tomorrow you'll check the newer sections and perhaps lay a few more branches where the growth needs encouragement. It's satisfying work, this partnership with living wood, this collaboration between human planning and natural persistence. Gerald can keep his splinters and carpentry bills. You'll stick with your fortress that feeds itself, defends itself, and gets more beautiful every year. The fever breaks just as dawn creeps through your shutters, and you wake to find your infant daughter finally sleeping peacefully in her wooden cradle. For 3 terrifying days, little Emma has been burning with sickness while the December winds howled outside your cottage. Your wife Marie sits beside the cradle, exhausted but smiling, her hand resting on something that probably saved your daughter's life. A clay vessel that's still radiating gentle warmth despite the fire having died hours ago. Welcome to the medieval world of thermal mass storage, or as you like to think of it, clay batteries. Now, when you hear clay battery, you might imagine monks in pointy hats zapping frogs with static electricity, or medieval peasants accidentally inventing the Tesla. But no, this kind of battery had nothing to do with electricity, and everything to do with temperature control. Long before thermostats, mini fridges, or the phrase climate anxiety entered human vocabulary. You rise quietly and examine the clay vessel that's been keeping your daughter warm all night. It's about the size of a large pot, made from the finest clay you could shape in your workshop. Yesterday evening, you heated it beside the fire until it was almost too hot to touch, then wrapped it carefully in wool and placed it near Emma's cradle. Now, 12 hours later, it's still warm enough to provide gentle, steady heat, like a medieval space heater that never needs plugging in. Clay, as it turns out, is not just for pots, questionable sculptures, and preschool art disasters. In the medieval world, it was an unspoken genius of thermal mass, which is a fancy way of saying it holds onto heat or cold like a stubborn grandmother holds onto grudges. The science is actually simple. Clay absorbs energy slowly and releases it even more slowly, creating a natural temperature regulation system that would make modern HVAC engineers jealous. Your cottage, like most medieval homes, uses clay-lined vessels and walls strategically placed throughout the living space. In summer, these clay elements keep your home cooler than the surrounding air. In winter, they retain heat longer than most building materials, creating pockets of comfort that can mean the difference between survival and, well, not survival. Historians still argue whether medieval builders fully understood the thermal properties they were exploiting or just stumbled onto effective techniques through trial and error, but the results speak for themselves. Your neighbor Gerald, who insists on using only wood and stone, spends twice as much on fuel and still shivers through cold snaps. You check the other clay vessels around your home. Near the hearth, several unglazed pots sit partially buried in the earthen floor. These stay cool even in summer heat, using evaporation to chill their contents. You store milk, butter, and ale in them, creating a medieval refrigeration system that's cheaper, quieter, and less likely to make your leftovers taste like chemical coolant. The process is elegantly simple. Water seeps slowly through the porous clay and evaporates from the surface, cooling whatever's inside. It's the same principle that makes you feel cold when you step out of a bath into moving air, except it works continuously and requires no energy input except the occasional splash of water on the clay's surface. Marie stirs and smiles as she sees you checking the temperature vessels. "The clay kept her warm all night," she whispers, "even when the fire went low." This is the beauty of thermal mass. It doesn't depend on constant fuel input. Once charged with heat or cold, clay objects become autonomous climate control devices, working steadily without human intervention. You've also learned to heat clay bricks beside the fire, then wrap them in cloth and tuck them into your bed before sleeping. It's like having a hot water bottle, but earthier and less likely to leak scalding liquid onto your already questionable mattress. These heated bricks can keep you warm for hours, gradually releasing their stored energy through the long winter nights. Some of your clay vessels serve double duty. The large water jars near the door stay cool in summer and can be heated in winter, providing both temperature control and water storage. Unlike modern batteries that explode if you look at them wrong, clay batteries just work. At worst, they crack and quietly give up, requiring nothing more dramatic than a trip to the potter's wheel. As morning light strengthens, you add wood to the fire and begin heating today's clay batteries. It's become routine, this daily charging of your thermal storage system. You'll heat the vessels that need warming, refresh the water on the cooling pots, and ensure your home maintains its perfect microclimate regardless of what nature throws at you. Emma stirs in her cradle, but she's no longer fevered. The steady, gentle warmth from your clay battery helped her small body fight off whatever winter sickness had taken hold. It's a reminder that sometimes the most sophisticated technology is also the most simple. Just clay, heat, and an understanding of how materials behave when we work with their natural properties instead of against them. Your hands are cramping again. For the past 6 hours, you've been rubbing a clay cooking pot with a smooth river stone, working in steady, circular motions that have turned your fingers raw and your shoulders into knots of protest. Your neighbor Gerald peeks through your workshop window and shakes his head. "Anna, you've been at that all day. What in heaven's name are you trying to accomplish?" You pause in your rhythmic scraping and give him a tired smile. "I'm making the pot." Obedient. What you're doing would look like madness to a modern person, armed with non-stick cookware and late-night infomercials promising effortless cooking. But in your medieval world, long before Teflon coatings and ceramic surfaces, you're creating something called friction glaze, a technique that transforms rough, grabby clay into something approaching smooth, food-friendly perfection. It's not magic, and it's definitely not effortless, but it works. Eventually. The pot you're working on started life as coarse clay, about as non-stick as sandpaper mixed with tree bark. When you tried cooking porridge in it yesterday, the results were tragic. The oats fused to the clay surface like they'd signed a permanent lease, and cleaning required scraping with a knife and several creative curse words that would make a sailor blush. But you've heard whispers from other potters about a technique that can tame even the most rebellious cookware. Friction glaze works through pure, stubborn persistence. You take your still damp pottery and rub it with smooth tools, stones, bone implements, or pieces of hard wood, compressing the surface particles and sealing the microscopic pores that make food stick. It's like giving your pot a deep tissue massage, except the pot never relaxes and your hands feel like they're going to fall off. The process requires perfect timing. Too dry, and the clay won't respond to your efforts. Too wet, and you'll just smear the surface into useless mush. You need that sweet spot where the clay is firm but still slightly plastic, willing to be convinced but not eager to cooperate. It's pottery at its most temperamental. Historians still argue whether friction glazing was developed independently in multiple cultures or spread through trade routes along with other ceramic techniques. But what's certain is that medieval potters considered it worth the extraordinary effort. You're essentially hand-polishing every molecule of the cooking surface, aligning clay particles like a medieval quality control inspector with obsessive-compulsive tendencies. You switch to a bone tool, a piece of deer antler worn smooth from years of use. The bone glides more easily than stone, creating a subtle shine that catches the workshop's dim light. Imagine spending half a day massaging a soup pot like it owes you money. That's friction glaze in a nutshell. Your arm muscles burn, but the surface is becoming noticeably smoother, taking on an almost mirror-like finish in places. The transformation isn't immediate or dramatic. It's more like watching paint dry, except the paint is clay, and you're the brush, and everything hurts. But gradually, methodically, the rough clay surface becomes compressed and sealed. When you run your finger across the polished area, it feels almost silky compared to the untreated sections that still grab at your skin like sandpaper. Some potters took the process even further, coating their burnished pots with a thin layer of animal fat before the final firing. This created a kind of prehistoric seasoning process, sealing the surface and adding an extra layer of non-stick protection. It wasn't foolproof. You still couldn't expect modern non-stick performance, but it reduced food adhesion enough to make cooking and cleaning significantly less traumatic. The labor involved is absolutely brutal. Your shoulders ache, your fingers are developing calluses in new and interesting places, and you're pretty sure you're giving yourself repetitive stress injuries that won't be properly diagnosed for another 600 years. But the alternative is cookware that turns every meal into an archaeological excavation project. You take a break and flex your cramped fingers. The pot is about half finished, with the polished sections gleaming dully beside the still rough areas waiting for attention. Tomorrow, you'll continue the process, working methodically around the entire cooking surface until every inch has been compressed, aligned, and convinced to behave. Gerald stops by again, carrying his own rough clay pot that's clearly been giving him trouble. "So, this polishing business," he says hopefully. "How long does it usually take?" You look at your half-finished pot, then at your raw fingertips, then at Gerald's expectant face. "About 3 days of pure misery," you tell him cheerfully. "But then you'll have cookware that actually releases food instead of holding it hostage." He nods thoughtfully and hefts his problematic pot. "Right then, I'll just keep scraping with knives." You shrug and pick up your bone tool again. Modern preppers might spend hundreds on titanium cookware with space-age coatings, but you'll stick with your friction-glazed clay and the satisfaction of knowing that every smooth inch was earned through pure, stubborn effort. The fog is so thick this morning that you can't see your own feet, let alone the path that should be leading you home from the market. You stand perfectly still in what you think is the middle of the road, but honestly, you could be in someone's turnip patch for all you know. Modern people would panic, pull out their phones and start complaining about lack of GPS signal. But you close your eyes, tilt your head slightly, and do something that would seem like witchcraft to anyone with a smartphone. You listen your way home. Welcome to the lost art of sound navigation, a skill that would make a bat jealous and a modern person completely helpless. This isn't echolocation. You're not clicking your tongue and waiting for echoes, though that would be impressively weird. This is practical survival through careful listening, and frankly, we don't give our medieval ancestors enough credit for this particular superpower. You cup your hand behind your right ear and rotate slowly, like a human satellite dish scanning for signals. There, faint but unmistakable, you hear the deep bronze tone of St. Bartholomew's church bell ringing the hour. Not the rapid alarm clanging that means fire or invasion, just the steady, measured tolling that says, "It's 9 o'clock and all is well," assuming you're not lost in fog, like an idiot. Medieval communities were obsessed with bells, and not just because they enjoyed making noise. Church bells, cowbells, sheep bells, and strategically placed clappers served as an entire navigation network that cut through fog, darkness, and the general medieval tendency for everything to look exactly the same. Towns often rang their church bells not just for religious services, but as auditory lighthouses, reminding travelers that civilization still existed somewhere in all this peasant-scented mist. You begin walking toward the bell sound, counting your steps and listening for additional clues. Your neighbor Gerald's rooster crows somewhere to your left. A terrible navigator, that bird, but at least you know you're not completely turned around. Roosters may be unreliable timekeepers, but they're surprisingly consistent about location, unlike Gerald himself, who once got lost in his own cabbage patch. Historians still argue whether sound navigation was formally taught or just developed naturally in communities where getting lost could mean freezing to death. But the evidence suggests medieval people had acoustic awareness that would shame a modern person wearing noise-canceling headphones. These were people who could identify their village by the specific tone of its church bell and determine how lost they were by counting dog barks per minute. The fog swirls around you as you follow the bell sounds, but now you're picking up other audio landmarks. A cow lows mournfully in the distance. That would be Farmer William's prize Holstein, who always complains loudly when it's time for milking. Cows might not be the brightest livestock, but they're creatures of habit, and that particular moo is coming from exactly where it should be if you're on the right path. Sound layering becomes crucial in navigation. The church bell provides your primary bearing, but it's the secondary sounds that give you precision. A dog barking to your right, that's the miller's hound, who guards the grain stores with the enthusiasm of a medieval security system. The rhythmic thunk-thunk of someone chopping wood echoes from ahead and slightly left, probably Thomas the Carpenter, who starts work ridiculously early and makes enough noise to wake the dead. Some communities had developed surprisingly sophisticated audio navigation aids. Forests and mountain passes sometimes featured wind chimes, clanging pots, or drums hung from trees to help mark important trails. These weren't random noisemakers. They were carefully positioned to create acoustic breadcrumbs that could guide travelers even when visibility was zero. You pause as the wind shifts, bringing new sounds. The distant lowing of cattle suggests you're near the common grazing area, which means home is perhaps half a mile ahead. But there's something else. The faint sound of metal striking metal. That rhythmic ring, ring, ring can only be coming from one place. The blacksmith's forge, where your brother works, hammering out horseshoes and agricultural tools with the predictable rhythm of someone who's done the same job for 20 years. Even taverns contributed to the navigation network. Many had musicians or simply loud, alcohol-fueled conversations that spilled into the street like a beacon of ale-scented safety. Follow the lute music and boisterous laughter, and you'd find warmth, food, and possibly your cousin passed out under a bench. It wasn't dignified navigation, but it was effective. The fog begins to thin slightly as you walk, and shapes start emerging from the gray soup around you. There's the stone wall that marks the boundary of your village, exactly where the acoustic evidence suggested it would be. You've successfully navigated home using nothing but your ears, local knowledge, and the medieval understanding that sound travels farther and more reliably than sight. As you approach your cottage, you can hear your wife Marie humming while she tends the morning fire. It's a sound that means safety, warmth, and breakfast that doesn't involve getting lost in meteorological soup. You made it home through audio navigation, a skill that modern GPS users have completely forgotten, but one that kept medieval travelers alive when the world disappeared into fog, darkness, or the general inconvenience of weather. Your mouth tastes like you've been chewing on a blacksmith's apron, and the gritty sensation between your teeth suggests that yesterday's dental hygiene session was particularly aggressive. You rise from your straw mattress and reach for the small pottery jar beside your bed, the one filled with what looks like black sand but is actually your most important health tool: charcoal powder. Welcome to medieval dental care, where the only thing standing between you and total tooth collapse before age 40 is burned wood mixed with hope and desperation. If you lived in the Middle Ages and wanted to keep your teeth from rotting out of your skull prematurely, you had exactly one go-to solution: charcoal. Not toothpaste, not floss, not those little plastic picks that modern people lose immediately after buying them. Just burned stuff, ground into powder, and applied directly to your teeth using whatever was available: fingers, sticks, or if you were particularly fashion-forward, a rag tied around a twig. You dip your finger into the charcoal powder and begin scrubbing your teeth with the enthusiasm of someone who's seen what happens to people who don't. The texture is challenging. Imagine brushing your teeth with gritty ash while someone plays a violin made of fingernails on chalkboard. But it's working, sort of. And when your alternative is letting plaque party freely until your gums stage a violent revolt, suddenly rubbing carbon against your enamel seems reasonable. Medieval people didn't exactly have Colgate, or those commercials featuring impossibly white smiles and people laughing at salads. What they had was an understanding that charred wood possessed certain qualities. When mixed with salt, dried herbs, or crushed shells, it became a sort of tooth scrub that could polish enamel, remove food buildup, and maybe, if the saints were feeling particularly generous, delay total dental collapse until your 40s. The recipe you're using came from your grandmother, who lived to the impressive age of 52 with most of her teeth intact, which was basically medieval dental Olympics material. She mixed charcoal powder with salt and dried mint, creating a paste that cleaned teeth while providing the illusion of freshness. It wasn't pleasant. Brushing with this mixture felt exactly like chewing sand during a bonfire. But it was better than the alternative. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the antibacterial properties of charcoal or just noticed that it made their mouths feel less like plague breeding grounds. But the results were surprisingly effective. Charcoal has mild antimicrobial qualities, meaning it helped fight the bacteria that cause bad breath and tooth decay. Fresh breath in the medieval context meant you could speak within 3 feet of someone without causing tears or small children to flee. You rinse your mouth with water from the clay pitcher, spitting the black residue into the chamber pot. Your teeth feel cleaner, though they look like you've been eating coal, which isn't entirely inaccurate. The charcoal has removed the worst of yesterday's food debris and hopefully disrupted some of the bacterial colonies that were planning a hostile takeover of your mouth. Some people enhance their charcoal paste with additional ingredients that would horrify modern dentists. Mint, rosemary, or sage were added, not necessarily for dental effectiveness, but for the desperate hope of achieving something resembling pleasant breath. Others swore by vinegar rinses afterward, which likely undid any good the charcoal accomplished, while adding a nice enamel-melting bonus to the morning routine. Your neighbor Gerald appears at your window, drawn by the sounds of vigorous tooth scrubbing. "Still using that black powder?" he asks, revealing his own teeth, which look like an archaeological site where bad things happened. Gerald prefers the ignore it and hope for the best approach to dental care, which explains why he speaks with a slight whistle and why his smile looks like a haunted graveyard. The truth is that medieval dental work, when things went really bad, involved pliers, strong arms, and a complete absence of anesthesia that would make modern people faint just thinking about it. So yes, smearing ashes on your teeth suddenly looked like a very attractive alternative to having them yanked out by someone named Bartholomew, who also sharpened knives and castrated pigs for extra income. You finish your dental routine by rubbing a final bit of charcoal powder on your gums, which feels slightly less inflamed than yesterday. It's not perfect. Your mouth still tastes like you've been French kissing a campfire, but your teeth are cleaner, your breath is marginally less offensive, and you've successfully avoided a date with Bartholomew, the multi-purpose tooth puller. Modern charcoal has made a comeback in hipster toothpaste and spa treatments, marketed to people who want to feel connected to natural wellness traditions. But let's be clear, medieval people didn't use charcoal to be trendy or Instagram-worthy. They used it because the only other option was having their teeth pulled by a guy who also removed splinters, set bones, and performed amateur surgery with tools that hadn't been cleaned since the Crusades. Your house is trying to kill you. Well, not intentionally, but the walls are literally made of sticks, mud, straw, and what your neighbor Gerald delicately refers to as barnyard contributions, which is a polite way of saying animal dung. Yet somehow, this combination of materials that sounds like a recipe for disaster has kept your family warm, dry, and structurally sound for the past 15 years. Welcome to the world of wattle and daub construction, where medieval peasants built homes out of what modern people would consider compost. Modern housing is mostly drywall, concrete, and IKEA furniture that collapses if you even think about leaning on it wrong. But you live in a house built using techniques that would make a modern contractor reach for his liability insurance while simultaneously admiring the ingenious simplicity of it all. You wake this morning to inspect a small crack that's appeared in your eastern wall, not because the house is falling down, but because wattle and daub requires regular maintenance, like a high-maintenance pet that happens to be load-bearing. The process of repair gives you a chance to appreciate just how brilliantly mad this construction technique really is. First, there's the wattle, which is just a fancy medieval word for woven branches, twigs, or long, flexible sticks. Think basket weaving, but taller, colder, and way more likely to collapse on your goat if you mess up the measurements. These wattle panels are fastened between wooden posts, creating what looks like the skeleton of a very confused fence that's having an identity crisis about whether it wants to be a wall. The real magic happens with the daub, that charming hand-mixed concoction of mud, straw, clay, and yes, animal dung that you're about to blend with the enthusiasm of someone who's run out of other options. The dung isn't just there for medieval ambiance. It's actually a crucial binding agent that helps hold everything together while adding a rustic scent that says, "Home sweet, slightly composting home." You gather your materials with the same care a modern person might reserve for selecting artisanal coffee beans. The clay comes from the riverbank where it's naturally plastic and sticky. The straw is last year's wheat stubble cut to lengths that will distribute evenly through the mixture. And the dung, well, that comes from wherever you can find the freshest, most binding-appropriate animal waste, because apparently medieval construction required a degree in comparative livestock excrement analysis. Historians still argue whether the specific ratios of mud to straw to dung were standardized across regions or varied according to local materials and personal preference. But what's certain is that getting the mixture right required skill that was passed down through generations like a family recipe for edible architecture. You begin mixing the daub in a wooden trough, adding water gradually while working the materials together with a long stick. The consistency you're aiming for is somewhere between thick porridge and modeling clay, wet enough to be workable but dry enough to hold its shape when applied to the wattle framework. Too wet and it'll just slide off the walls like expensive failure. Too dry and it won't bond properly, leaving gaps that invite drafts, mice, and disapproving looks from Gerald. The application process is oddly satisfying. You take handfuls of the daub mixture and smear it into the wattle framework, pressing it through the gaps and smoothing it with your palms. It's like finger painting, except the paint is made of agricultural waste and the canvas is your actual house. The mixture fills the spaces between the woven branches, creating a solid wall that's surprisingly strong and well insulated. What would absolutely blow a modern builder's mind is how effective this seemingly primitive technique actually is. Wattle and daub walls provide excellent thermal mass, keeping homes cool in summer and warm in winter. The thick earthen walls moderate temperature swings naturally, creating a comfortable indoor climate without any mechanical systems or energy inputs beyond manual labor and questionable material choices. The organic materials also make the walls somewhat flexible, allowing the structure to shift and settle without cracking catastrophically. Unlike modern rigid construction that fails dramatically when stressed, wattle and daub bends, adapts, and generally behaves like a building material that's been doing yoga for centuries. You smooth the fresh daub with a wooden float, creating a surface that will eventually dry to a warm, earthy finish. It's not glamorous. Your walls might occasionally crack, flake, or attract curious chickens, but patching them up is just part of your weekly routine, right between "don't starve" and "yell at Gerald's goat for trespassing again." Despite how primitive it sounds, wattle and daub construction could last decades with proper maintenance. Some medieval homes still standing today have their original wattle walls, which means some peasant in 1350 did a better job than your last contractor who charged 3 times as much and left you with drywall that develops personality disorders in humid weather. Your bed is trying to eat you alive. Literally. As you settle onto your straw mattress for what you hope will be a peaceful night's sleep, you can feel them. Tiny legs scuttling across your ankles, microscopic mandibles preparing for their nightly feast. And what sounds suspiciously like a flea convention planning committee discussing the best approach to your left shoulder blade. But here's the thing. Unlike your neighbor Gerald, who wakes up looking like he's been wrestling with an angry porcupine, you sleep relatively pest-free. Your secret weapon? Herb-laced bedding. Medieval bedtime was basically a nightly battle against everything that crawled, bit, or buzzed with malicious intent. Picture this. A rickety straw mattress stuffed with regret, a thatched roof dripping something you'd rather not identify, and the constant threat of fleas, lice, and things that make ominous clicking sounds in the darkness. Your ancestors didn't just accept this nightmare, they fought back with what can only be described as aromatic warfare. You learned this technique from your grandmother, who lived to the impressive age of 63 without being completely devoured by parasites, which was basically medieval superhero status. Instead of stuffing your mattress with plain straw, which was essentially an open invitation for every bug in the county to hold their annual family reunion in your bed, you mixed in strong-scented herbs that acted like nature's medieval bug spray. The herb selection process requires the knowledge of a medieval pharmacist crossed with someone who really understands insect psychology. Lavender is your primary weapon. Those tiny purple flowers might look innocent, but they're basically chemical warfare against anything with more than 4 legs. You gather it in late summer when the oils are most concentrated, drying bundles that hang from your rafters like fragrant medieval air fresheners. Mint joins the battle formation, not because it smells pleasant, but because fleas apparently find it about as appealing as Gerald finds honest work. Wormwood adds its bitter, almost aggressive scent, the kind of smell that says, "Nothing good lives here. Move along." Pennyroyal brings its sharp, penetrating aroma that can clear sinuses and chase away anything smaller than a house cat. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the specific chemical compounds that repelled insects, or just noticed that certain herbs made bedtime less like feeding time at a parasite zoo. But the results were undeniably effective. These weren't random plants thrown together. This was a carefully curated collection of botanical bodyguards. You begin refreshing your mattress herbs, pulling out the old straw that's lost its potency and replacing it with fresh material. The process is like changing sheets, except the sheets are architectural and smell like a witch's garden exploded in your bedroom. But when you press your face into the fresh straw, instead of musty decay, you get a complex bouquet of mint, lavender, and that sharp green smell that promises a night without tiny legs tap dancing across your skin. Some herbs serve double duty in medieval pest control theory. Tansy was believed to keep away not just fleas, but actual demons, which was convenient since medieval people weren't entirely sure there was a difference. Rue supposedly repelled both insects and evil spirits, making it the medieval equivalent of a security system that also smelled like bitter herbs and existential dread. The herb placement requires strategic thinking that would impress a military tactician. You don't just dump everything in randomly. Certain herbs go near your head for maximum scent distribution. Others are concentrated around the areas where you're most vulnerable to attack. It's like creating aromatic fortifications around your sleeping body, except the enemy is microscopic and really, really persistent. But the herbal defense system didn't stop at mattresses. You scatter fresh herbs across your floor rushes, weave them into door frames, and hang bundles over your bed like botanical guardian angels. Your entire sleeping area becomes an aromatic fortress that smells like an apothecary exploded, but keeps the crawling horrors at bay. The effectiveness varies with the seasons and the freshness of your herbs. A newly prepared herbal mattress could provide blessed relief for several weeks, but gradually the oils would fade, and the tiny invaders would begin their reconnaissance missions, testing your defenses for weak spots. That's when you knew it was time to gather fresh herbs and begin the cycle again. You finish arranging the fresh herb mixture and add one final touch, a sprig of rosemary tucked under your pillow. Not because rosemary has any particular anti-pest properties, but because your grandmother swore it gave sweeter dreams. Whether that's true or just the placebo effect of sleeping in something that smells like a Mediterranean hillside instead of a barnyard, you'll take whatever comfort you can get. Gerald appears at your window, scratching vigorously at what appears to be a fresh collection of insect bites. "Still doing that herb business?" he asks, eyeing your aromatic bedding preparations. You just smile and settle into your lavender-scented fortress, knowing that while Gerald will spend the night being sampled by every parasite in the village, you'll sleep surrounded by botanical bodyguards that have been keeping medieval people bug-free for centuries. Your stomach growls with the authority of someone who hasn't eaten since yesterday's breakfast. But you're not worried. While your neighbor Gerald frantically digs through his rapidly emptying food stores and mutters increasingly creative curses about the failed harvest, you calmly walk to the north side of your cottage where something amazing awaits. A collection of stone slabs that have been keeping your food fresh without any mechanical intervention, electrical power, or mysterious humming sounds that make you wonder if your appliances are plotting against you. Welcome to the medieval marvel of passive preservation. Stone cooling shelves that make modern refrigeration look embarrassingly complicated and energy hungry. These aren't just random rocks you've arranged for decoration. They're carefully positioned thermal regulators that work on principles your ancestors understood intuitively, even if they couldn't explain the physics behind why cold stone plus smart placement equals food that doesn't turn into science experiments. The stone slabs built into your north-facing wall aren't there by accident. Medieval builders understood that the north side of structures received the least direct sunlight, creating naturally cooler microclimates that could be enhanced with the right materials. Your thick slabs of slate, or marble, if you'd been feeling particularly fancy when you built this place, absorbed the cool temperatures from the surrounding earth and air, creating what's essentially a medieval mini-fridge, but with more spiders and less guilt about energy consumption. You run your hand across the stone surface and smile at the coolness that meets your palm. Even though it's mid-afternoon and the summer sun is doing its best to turn everything else into an oven, these stone shelves remain refreshingly cool to the touch. It's like having a permanent cold spot in your home that never needs defrosting and never makes those alarming clicking sounds that modern appliances seem to specialize in. The science behind this is elegantly simple, which is probably why it worked so well for people who had never heard of thermodynamics, but understood that some things stayed cold longer than others. Stone has tremendous thermal mass. It absorbs and releases heat very slowly, acting like a natural temperature stabilizer. Once your stone shelves reach their cool equilibrium temperature, they maintain it stubbornly, regardless of what the weather is doing outside. Historians still argue whether medieval builders consciously calculated thermal properties or just noticed through generations of trial and error that thick stone on the north side kept things cold, but the results speak for themselves. Your butter hasn't turned rancid despite the heat, your milk is still drinkable after 2 days, and that questionable cheese you bought from the traveling merchant hasn't achieved sentience yet. You check your current food inventory, arranged on the stone shelves like a medieval delicatessen that actually functions. Milk in clay vessels sits comfortably cool, maintaining its freshness far longer than anything Gerald manages with his wooden shelves and complete lack of thermal planning. Butter wrapped in wet cloth stays firm and spreadable, rather than becoming the liquid disappointment that characterizes most summer dairy storage. The meat you purchased yesterday, carefully wrapped and placed on the coolest section of stone, shows no signs of the rapid deterioration that would normally begin within hours in this heat. It's not frozen, obviously, since you're operating without electricity or the miracles of modern refrigeration, but it's significantly cooler than the ambient air temperature, which can mean the difference between dinner and food poisoning. Some of your stone shelves serve double duty through ingenious medieval engineering. The larger slabs are positioned to catch condensation from specially placed water vessels, creating natural humidity that keeps certain foods from drying out while maintaining the cool temperatures that prevent spoilage. It's like having climate control, except it's powered by physics and positioning rather than complicated machinery. For enhanced cooling effect, you've learned to place damp cloths over certain items, creating evaporative cooling that would make a modern engineer nod with approval. As water evaporates from the cloth, it draws heat away from whatever's underneath, creating temperatures that can be several degrees cooler than the surrounding air. It's the same principle that makes you feel cold when you step out of a bath, except it works continuously and doesn't require you to be naked and wet. Your neighbor Gerald appears at your door, looking harried and slightly desperate, My cheese has gone completely off in this heat, he complains, holding what appears to be a dairy product that's achieved independence and possibly developed its own political opinions. How do you keep everything so edible? You gesture toward your stone cooling system with the modest pride of someone who's mastered medieval food preservation. Cold stone, smart placement, and understanding that sometimes the old ways work better than whatever new ideas people keep trying, you explain. Gerald examines your setup with the fascination of someone discovering that effective solutions don't always require complicated technology or expensive equipment. The beauty of passive preservation is its reliability. No moving parts to break, no power sources to fail, no mysterious maintenance requirements that involve calling specialists who charge more than your annual income. Just stone, physics, and the accumulated wisdom of people who understood that keeping food fresh was a matter of survival rather than convenience. Your head feels like it's been used as an anvil by an enthusiastic blacksmith, and the pounding behind your eyes suggests that either you're developing some medieval plague or you've simply pushed yourself too hard in yesterday's harvest work. Modern people would reach for aspirin, ibuprofen, or whatever colorful pills promise quick relief and potential liver damage. But you? You walk purposefully to your vegetable garden and select what might be the most unlikely medicine cabinet in history: a large cabbage leaf. What you're about to do would make a modern pharmacist raise their eyebrows and possibly question your sanity. But cabbage leaf dressings were the medieval equivalent of that cooling gel pack you keep in your freezer, except more versatile, completely natural, and significantly less likely to leak mysterious blue fluid all over your kitchen floor. You choose your cabbage leaf with the care of someone selecting a fine wine, looking for one that's large enough to cover the affected area, but tender enough to conform to the contours of your aching head. The ideal leaf is fresh, slightly cool from the morning dew, and free from the holes that indicate it's been serving as lunch for someone else's livestock. Cabbage leaves, it turns out, are nature's perfect compressed material. They're naturally cooling, flexible enough to wrap around virtually any body part, and contain compounds that modern science has grudgingly admitted might actually do something therapeutic. But in your medieval world, you don't need scientific validation. You just need something that works when your alternatives are suffering in silence or letting the village barber surgeon drill holes in your skull to release evil humors. The preparation process is surprisingly simple, which probably explains why it survived as a folk remedy for centuries. You crush the leaf slightly, not enough to destroy it, but enough to release some of the natural juices that contain whatever magical cabbage properties make this actually effective. The crushing creates tiny breaks in the leaf's cellular structure, allowing the therapeutic compounds to seep out and do their mysterious healing work. Historians still argue whether cabbage leaf treatments were based on genuine medicinal properties, or just the placebo effect of having something cool and moist pressed against inflamed tissue. But frankly, when your head feels like it's hosting a medieval torture festival, you'll take relief from whatever source provides it. You wrap the prepared cabbage leaf around your forehead, securing it with a strip of linen that makes you look like you're wearing the world's most organic headband. The immediate cooling sensation is actually quite pleasant. The leaf's natural moisture content and its ability to conduct heat away from your skin creates a soothing effect that's remarkably similar to modern cold therapy, except it grows in your garden and doesn't require electricity. But cabbage leaf dressings weren't just for headaches. Medieval people used them for an impressive variety of ailments that would make a modern emergency room look like a specialist clinic. Swollen joints got the cabbage treatment, with leaves wrapped around knees, elbows, and ankles that had been pushed beyond their reasonable limits by the physically demanding nature of medieval life. Mastitis, that painful breast infection that could make nursing mothers miserable, was treated with cabbage leaves applied directly to the affected area. The natural anti-inflammatory compounds in the cabbage, combined with the cooling effect, provided relief that nursing mothers swore by for generations. It wasn't a cure, but it was comfort when comfort was desperately needed. For chest congestion or respiratory complaints, some healers recommended warming the cabbage leaves instead of using them cold, creating a heated poultice that was supposed to help break up whatever was making breathing difficult. Whether this actually worked or just provided the psychological comfort of having something being done about the problem, people continued using heated cabbage compresses well into the modern era. You adjust your cabbage leaf headband and notice that the pounding has actually decreased to a more manageable level. Is it the anti-inflammatory compounds, the cooling effect, the placebo benefit of feeling like you're actively treating the problem? Honestly, you don't care about the mechanism. You care about the results, and the results are that your head hurts less than it did 10 minutes ago. The versatility of cabbage medicine extended beyond simple pain relief. Bruises, cuts, and general inflammation all received the cabbage treatment, with leaves applied as natural bandages that supposedly promoted healing while protecting the affected area. Some people even used cabbage juice as a gargle for sore throats, though that particular application required a strong stomach and a serious commitment to vegetable-based healthcare. Your neighbor Gerald appears at your garden gate, nursing what appears to be a swollen hand from his morning encounter with an angry chicken. "Is that cabbage on your head?" he asks with the polite bewilderment of someone who's never considered vegetables as medical equipment. You nod cheerfully and offer him a fresh leaf for his chicken-related injury, explaining the simple preparation technique with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a particularly effective life hack. And here's the beauty of cabbage leaf medicine. In lean times, those same therapeutic leaves could end up in your soup pot once you were done using them for medical purposes. Nothing was wasted in the medieval world, and a cabbage leaf that had spent the morning treating your headache could spend the evening improving your dinner, assuming you had the stomach for recycled vegetables and the practical mindset that characterized medieval survival. The sun has set, and your cottage is settling into darkness with the kind of finality that makes modern people reach instinctively for light switches that don't exist in your world. Candles are for churches and wealthy merchants, torches are expensive and dangerous, and sitting in complete darkness until dawn is only appealing if you enjoy staring contests with invisible mice. But you're not worried, because tonight you're going to create light using something that sounds like a contradiction in terms. Rushlights, also known as bacon torches for the budget-conscious. What you're about to make would seem like the most absurd fire hazard to a modern safety inspector, but rushlights were the medieval equivalent of LED bulbs. If LED bulbs were made from marsh plants soaked in animal fat and had all the reliability of a drunken peasant attempting poetry, they're cheap, relatively effective, and smell like a delightful combination of fried pig and swamp water, which was basically medieval aromatherapy. You begin by examining your supply of rushes, those long, thin reed-like plants that grow in every marshy area within walking distance of your village. The ideal rush is straight, about arm's length, and free from the kind of damage that suggests it's been serving as a chew toy for Gerald's escaped livestock. These aren't random weeds. They're carefully selected raw materials for your lighting industry. The preparation process requires patience and a strong tolerance for handling things that feel vaguely unpleasant. You carefully peel the rushes, removing the outer green skin while leaving a thin strip intact to hold the inner pith together. It's like performing surgery on plant material, except the patient is already dead, and the goal is to turn it into something flammable rather than something healthy. The soaking process is where things get interesting, and by interesting, we mean smelly in ways that would make a modern person question your life choices. You dip the prepared rushes into melted animal fat, bacon drippings, mutton tallow, or basically anything vaguely greasy that isn't immediately needed for dinner. The rush absorbs the fat like a botanical sponge, creating what's essentially a slow-burning wick that can provide light for anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour. Historians still argue whether rush lights were primarily used by the poor or were simply the most practical lighting solution for everyday use. But what's certain is that they represented a perfect marriage of available materials and immediate need. You're not trying to illuminate a cathedral. You're just trying to see well enough to avoid walking into furniture or stepping on the cat. The lighting ritual requires a special holder, a metal clip or stand that keeps the rush light at the proper angle while preventing it from setting your cottage on fire, which would definitely ruin your evening. These holders were often simple affairs made by the local blacksmith, designed more for function than beauty, though some showed surprisingly elegant craftsmanship for something that held burning swamp plants. You light your first rushlight and immediately understand both the appeal and the limitations of this medieval lighting solution. The flame is modest, not the bold, confident light of a torch or candle, but a gentle, flickering glow that pushes back just enough darkness to make navigation possible. It's like having a very small, very organic flashlight that smells like breakfast gone wrong. The light quality is surprisingly pleasant once you adjust your expectations. It's warm, steady, and creates the kind of intimate atmosphere that makes everything look slightly magical, assuming you can ignore the occasional sputtering and the persistent aroma of heated animal fat. Reading by rushlight is possible but challenging. Detailed work becomes an exercise in optimism and squinting. But here's where rushlights become genuinely clever. They're also teamers. Need to cook something for the duration of one rushlight? Perfect. Want to see how long it takes Gerald to stumble home from the tavern? Light a rush and count. They burn at predictable rates, making them useful for measuring time in an era when clocks were expensive luxuries owned by people who could afford to know exactly what time their money was earning more money. You light a second rush from the first as your initial light begins to sputter toward extinction. The process of maintaining illumination becomes a gentle rhythm, lighting new rushes before the old ones die, adjusting the holders, and managing your small fleet of bacon-scented torches with the skill of someone who's learned to work with medieval technology's limitations rather than against them. The smoke from rushlights is persistent. Your cottage gradually fills with a haze that smells like a very small barbecue restaurant specializing in marsh cuisine. It's not unpleasant exactly, but it's definitely present, creating an atmosphere that says medieval evening more effectively than any modern reproduction could manage. Gerald passes by your window and peers in at your collection of glowing rushlights with the expression of someone discovering that effective solutions don't always look sophisticated. "Still burning those plant torches?" he asks, while holding a crude torch that's producing 10 times as much smoke and consuming expensive materials at an alarming rate. You just smile and tend your modest but efficient lighting system, knowing that while his torch will burn out within the hour, your rush lights will keep you illuminated well into the night without breaking your budget or filling your cottage with the kind of smoke that makes breathing an adventure. You're holding what appears to be a lump of butter that's been buried in a swamp for several months, and honestly, that description isn't far from the truth. The chunk of dairy in your hands has a distinctly earthy aroma, a slightly gray color that suggests it's seen things, and a texture that makes you wonder if butter can develop personality disorders. But here's the amazing part. This bog butter is not only edible, it's actually been perfectly preserved for longer than some of your neighbors have been alive, thanks to one of the most unlikely preservation methods in medieval history. Today, we store butter in refrigerators, plastic containers, or inside artisanal wooden churns, if you're really committed to pretending you live on a Victorian dairy farm. But in your medieval world, refrigeration isn't an option. So naturally, someone looked at a cold, acidic, oxygen-poor swamp and thought, yeah, let's put the dairy product in there. And thus bog butter was born. A preservation technique that sounds like a practical joke, but actually works better than most modern storage methods. Bog butter is exactly what it sounds like. Butter, or sometimes lard, that was buried in a peat bog for months, years, or in some documented cases, centuries. Why a bog? Because despite being full of mud, insects, and things that probably hiss when disturbed, bogs are nature's least inviting but surprisingly effective preservation chambers, combining cold temperatures, acidity, and an absence of oxygen that creates perfect conditions for long-term food storage. The process begins with taking large quantities of butter, Not the small amounts you'd use for daily cooking, but serious bulk quantities meant for long-term storage or emergency reserves. You wrap these butter blocks in cloth, bark, or sometimes wooden containers, then bury them deep in the peat bog, where the cold, airless environment will keep bacteria and fungi from spoiling your dairy investment. The science behind bog preservation is actually quite sophisticated, though your medieval ancestors understood it through practical experience rather than chemistry textbooks. The cold temperature slows bacterial growth, the acidic environment created by decomposing plant matter inhibits spoilage organisms, and the lack of oxygen prevents oxidation that would normally turn butter rancid within weeks. Historians still argue whether bog butter storage was primarily used for emergency food reserves, tribute payments, or simply the most practical long-term preservation method available, but archaeological evidence suggests it was remarkably common across northern Europe. Some bog butter discoveries have been dated to over 3,000 years old, meaning ancient Celtic peasants' forgotten snacks are now in museums instead of on toast, which seems like a waste of perfectly good, preserved dairy. You examine your bog butter with the critical eye of someone evaluating a potentially edible science experiment. The cold, airless bog has kept bacteria and fungi from spoiling the butter, while the tannins in the peat have helped prevent oxidation. The result is a lump of dairy that, according to brave modern taste testers, smells like cheese, smoke, and earthy regret, but remains fundamentally recognizable as butter despite its extended underground vacation. The taste, from historical accounts, is complex. It's not the sweet, creamy butter you'd spread on fresh bread, but rather something with pronounced earthy undertones and a slightly cheesy flavor that suggests it's been having interesting conversations with bog chemistry. It's edible, certainly, but it's more survival food than gourmet experience, which was exactly what medieval people needed when fresh butter wasn't available. Burying your butter in a bog also provided excellent security against theft. Want to keep your valuable food stores safe from raiders, tax collectors, or neighbors with flexible definitions of property ownership? Hide them in a freezing, ankle-deep mud pit that requires significant excavation to access. No one's going to casually steal breakfast from a location that involves trudging through marsh water and digging in peat. The retrieval process is its own adventure. You wade into the bog with long sticks for probing, trying to locate buried containers based on landmarks that may have shifted over the months or years since burial. It's like treasure hunting, except the treasure is dairy products, and the map is your memory of where you put things before the landscape changed. You unwrap another section of your bog butter, noting how the cloth wrapping has darkened but remained intact. The preservation isn't just effective for the butter itself. The bog environment has also protected the organic materials used for wrapping, creating a complete package that survived conditions that would destroy most other storage methods. Gerald appears at your cottage, drawn by the distinctive aroma of bog-preserved dairy. "That's the butter you buried last spring?" he asks, eyeing the grayish lump with the fascination of someone discovering that effective food preservation doesn't always result in appetizing appearance. You nod and offer him a sample, explaining the bog storage technique with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a particularly clever life hack that involves digging holes in swamps. The beauty of bog butter lies not in its gourmet appeal, but in its reliability. When your other food preservation methods failed, when the harvest was poor, or when unexpected guests arrived demanding hospitality, bog butter provided a backup protein and fat source that could be retrieved and used regardless of weather, season, or the general inconvenience of medieval food scarcity. It wasn't Instagram-worthy, but it was survival-worthy, which in your world makes it more valuable than appearance. You're standing in front of what appears to be a perfectly ordinary oak tree, but you know better. Behind that innocent-looking bark lies your secret pantry, a hollow cavity that's been serving as your refrigerated storage unit for the past 2 years. While your neighbor Gerald struggles with spoiled food and inadequate storage solutions, you've discovered something that would make modern preppers weep with envy. nature's original storage container that came with built-in camouflage, temperature control, and zero installation fees. If you're imagining medieval people living in cozy hobbit holes with rustic larders and shelves of neatly labeled preserves, think again. Food storage was often less Pinterest perfect and more, please don't let this go rancid before winter kills us all. And one of the cleverest solutions was hiding your food supplies in hollow trees. The original pantry that grew itself required zero carpentry skills and came with built-in security features. Hollow trees were surprisingly common across the medieval countryside, whether naturally formed from age, lightning strikes, rot, or the overenthusiastic excavation work of woodland creatures who'd apparently majored in tree architecture. These cavities became impromptu storage units for peasants, travelers, and anyone with something perishable and no better options available. You approach your tree with the casual confidence of someone who's learned to work with medieval technology rather than against it. The hollow in this oak formed naturally over decades as the heartwood rotted away, leaving a dry, enclosed space that maintains relatively stable temperatures throughout the year. It's like having a cedar chest that's still attached to its original tree and doesn't require monthly payments to a furniture store. The interior of your hollow tree provides several advantages that would make a modern storage engineer nod with approval. The thick bark and enclosed cavity keep temperatures relatively stable, helping slow spoilage during warmer months while preventing freezing during mild winters. The natural insulation properties of wood create a microclimate that's significantly more stable than whatever chaos is happening with the outside weather. You check your current inventory, carefully arranged inside the tree's natural refrigerator. Cheese wrapped in cloth sits comfortably in the coolest section, maintaining its texture far better than anything stored in Gerald's sun-baked cottage. Dried meat hangs from small hooks you've installed, protected from moisture, while remaining easily accessible when you need protein for traveling or unexpected guests. Historians still argue whether hollow tree storage was primarily used for convenience or security, but the evidence suggests it served both purposes effectively. Need to hide food from thieves? Store it in a tree that looks exactly like every other tree in the forest. Want to keep provisions away from your cottage in case of fire or raids? A hollow tree provides off-site storage that doesn't advertise its contents to casual observers. The concealment factor cannot be overstated in importance. Visible food stores attracted unwanted attention from neighbors with flexible definitions of borrowing, tax collectors who assessed wealth based on apparent abundance, and raiders who considered well-stocked larders to be convenient shopping opportunities. But food hidden in hollow trees? That required local knowledge and deliberate searching to discover. Some people enhanced their tree storage with additional modifications that showed impressive medieval engineering skills. You've lined sections of your hollow with leaves and moss to keep things dry, and you've created small compartments using bark dividers to separate different types of food. It's like having a pantry with built-in organization features, except the organizational system grew naturally and doesn't require assembly instructions written by someone who clearly hates humanity. The tree also serves as a backup storage location for emergency supplies. In addition to regular food items, you keep dried herbs, medicinal plants, and emergency fire-starting materials tucked away in the deepest recesses of the hollow. If something happens to your cottage or you need to leave quickly, you have a complete survival kit waiting in the forest. You adjust the bark covering that conceals the tree's opening, a natural camouflage system that makes the storage compartment virtually invisible unless you know exactly where to look. The bark piece fits perfectly, creating a seal that keeps out rain while allowing enough air circulation to prevent condensation problems that could ruin your stored supplies. Gerald appears on the forest path, carrying an armload of spoiled vegetables that have apparently surrendered to the summer heat, despite his best storage efforts. "How do you keep everything so fresh?" he asks, with the desperation of someone whose food preservation techniques consist mainly of hoping for the best and being disappointed regularly. You gesture casually toward your tree, explaining the hollow storage concept with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a particularly effective medieval life hack. Gerald examines the setup with growing amazement, realizing that effective food storage doesn't always require complicated construction projects or expensive equipment. Sometimes it just requires recognizing and utilizing the natural resources that are literally growing around you. The beauty of hollow tree storage lies in its sustainability and accessibility. No maintenance fees, no complex mechanical systems, and no need for specialized knowledge beyond basic food handling common sense. When the world ends and modern storage systems fail, you'll still have your tree pantry, quietly maintaining optimal storage conditions while looking like just another piece of landscape to anyone who doesn't know its secret. Your stomach is making sounds that could wake the dead, and not in a good way. The harvest failed 3 months ago, your stored grain ran out last week, and Gerald's brilliant idea of just eat more turnips is no longer sustaining anyone's will to live. But while your neighbors are staring at their empty larders with the hollow-eyed despair of people contemplating whether tree roots might be edible, you're doing something that would absolutely horrify a modern person. You're carefully shaving bark from a birch tree and grinding it into what will soon become tonight's dinner. In the survival world, eating bark is usually code for things have gone very, very wrong. But in the Middle Ages, it was actually a legitimate survival food that kept entire communities alive during famines, which happened with the regularity of Gerald forgetting to secure his livestock. Introducing bark bread, a medieval delicacy that says, "I didn't starve, but I did chew a pine tree." What you're harvesting isn't the tough outer bark that looks like nature's version of armor plating. That stuff would be like trying to eat leather that's been left in the sun for 6 months. Instead, you're after the inner bark, also called cambium, the soft, moist layer just beneath the outer bark that carries nutrients throughout the tree. It's like the tree's circulatory system, except you're about to turn it into carbohydrates. The process requires knowledge that was passed down through generations of people who understood that survival sometimes meant expanding your definition of food to include things that grew vertically and had leaves. Pine, birch, and elm trees were the preferred sources, not because they tasted like medieval candy, but because their inner bark contained enough nutrients to keep people alive when traditional food sources had completely abandoned them. You use a sharp knife to carefully score the bark, creating strips that peel away cleanly without damaging the tree's ability to survive your dinner preparations. It's sustainable harvesting. Take enough to feed your family, but not enough to kill your food source. because a dead tree can't provide bark for next winter's famine, which is probably coming whether you're ready or not. Historians still argue whether bark consumption was primarily an emergency measure or a regular part of the medieval diet during lean seasons. But what's certain is that it was common enough to have established preparation techniques and recipes. This wasn't desperate people randomly chewing on trees. This was systematic food production using unconventional raw materials. The bark preparation process is more complex than you might expect. First, you dry the strips of inner bark, either by hanging them near your fire or laying them in sunny spots until they become brittle and easy to grind. The drying concentrates the nutrients while removing moisture that could cause spoilage, creating a shelf-stable ingredient that can be stored for months. Next comes the grinding, which transforms tough bark strips into something resembling flour. If flour were made from trees and had a slightly woodsy flavor that reminded you constantly of its origins. You use a stone quern or mortar and pestle, working methodically until the bark becomes a coarse powder that can be mixed with other ingredients to create something that technically qualifies as bread. The nutritional content would actually surprise a modern nutritionist. Bark contains fiber, trace minerals, and complex carbohydrates that provide genuine sustenance rather than just filling your stomach with inedible bulk. It kept people alive when grain stores were empty, taxes were due, and livestock had mysteriously disappeared, possibly organizing their own medieval labor union. Most bark bread recipes mix the ground bark with whatever was available. Acorns if you could find them, nettles for additional nutrition, actual flour if you were incredibly fortunate, and whatever herbs might disguise the fact that your dinner had recently been part of a vertical woody plant. The result was flat, chewy loaves that looked like bread and tasted like you were eating something that had been photosynthesizing until recently. You mix your bark flour with water and a small amount of actual grain flour you've been hoarding for special occasions, creating a dough that has the consistency of wet cardboard but represents the difference between nutrition and starvation. When your choices were bark bread or becoming bark yourself, meaning dead and potentially feeding the trees, you chose carbohydrates, regardless of their arboreal origins. Some people even develop preferences for different types of bark bread. Pine bark supposedly had a slightly resinous flavor that some found pleasant, while birch bark provided a milder taste that mixed better with other ingredients. Elm bark was considered the premium option, being less bitter than pine and more nutritious than birch, though premium in this context meant slightly less like chewing on lumber. You shape your bark bread into small, flat cakes and place them on a hot stone beside your fire. The cooking process fills your cottage with an aroma that's unique. It smells like a campfire had a baby with a bakery, and the baby decided to pursue a career in experimental cuisine. Gerald appears at your door, drawn by the unusual cooking smells in his own empty stomach. "Is that tree bread?" He asks with the fascination of someone discovering that survival sometimes requires creativity that extends beyond traditional food categories. You offer him a piece of your bark bread, explaining the preparation technique with the enthusiasm of someone sharing knowledge that could literally save lives during the next famine. The taste is educational. It's not delicious in any conventional sense, but it's filling, nutritious, and represents the triumph of human ingenuity over the inconvenience of food scarcity. If the world ends and you're standing in a forest with no food in sight, don't panic. Just look for a birch tree. Channel your inner medieval peasant and remember that you can totally eat that, even if your taste buds spend the entire meal filing complaints. You stand before your bronze mirror, but the reflection staring back looks like it belongs to someone who's been wrestling with death itself. Your eyes are rimmed with thick black lines that extend beyond your lids like the wings of some mythical bird. Your skin has been painted white with a paste that makes you look more statue than human, and the whole effect is so dramatically otherworldly that even you're slightly intimidated by your own appearance. But this isn't vanity, this is spiritual warfare. And tonight you must look like a goddess to speak with the gods. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, beauty wasn't a hobby or a weekend activity. It was a daily devotion, a religious obligation, and quite possibly the difference between divine favor and cosmic abandonment. Ancient Mesopotamians didn't just groom themselves, they ritualized it, transforming their bodies into living temples that would make modern Instagram influencers weep with inadequacy and existential dread. Your eyes receive the most attention because they're considered windows to the soul and, more importantly, gateways for divine communication. The thick black eyeliner you're applying isn't just for dramatic effect. It's made from kohl, a powdered concoction of lead, copper, and antimony that would make a modern dermatologist faint with horror, but was believed to protect you from evil spirits, and more practically, from the desert sun's blinding glare. The application process requires steady hands and considerable faith in your cosmetic chemistry. You mix the kohl powder with oil and water, creating a paste that goes on thick and stays put through heat, humidity, and whatever divine encounters await you this evening. Both men and women paint these dramatic lines because spiritual protection and cosmic communication are equal opportunity requirements in Mesopotamian theology. Your skincare routine would make modern beauty influencers question their entire approach to self-care. You've just finished exfoliating with crushed semi-precious stones mixed into oils, a treatment that sounds like it should cost hundreds at a luxury spa, but is actually standard preparation for anyone planning to commune with deities who apparently have very high standards for mortal appearance. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian beauty practices were primarily religious, social, or practical in nature, but the evidence suggests they were all three simultaneously, creating a culture where looking good was literally a matter of spiritual survival and social status wrapped up in one very elaborate package. The mud mask you applied earlier came from the riverbanks, full of minerals that the Mesopotamians believed could purify not just your skin, but your very essence. After it dried, you scraped it off gently, leaving your skin smooth and luminous with the kind of glow that suggested you'd been personally blessed by Inanna herself, the goddess of beauty, love, and strategic warfare. Hair removal was another ordeal that would make modern beauty treatments seem gentle by comparison. Using sharpened seashells, early tweezers, or primitive razors, you've plucked, scraped, and burned off virtually every hair below your eyebrows. Smoothness was equated with refinement, cleanliness, and godliness. The more polished your appearance, the closer you resembled divine perfection as depicted in temple art. Your fragrance routine involves oils so valuable they could serve as currency in international trade. Myrrh, frankincense, and cedar have been infused into animal fats and applied to your skin like liquid gold. These scents weren't just pleasant, they were powerful. People believed these fragrances purified the body, pleased the gods, and created an aromatic barrier between mortal flesh and whatever cosmic forces might take offense at inadequate personal grooming. The eyebrow situation is particularly intense. You've tattooed them using soot and natural dyes, creating bold, permanent arches that frame your face with the kind of dramatic definition that says, "I take divine communication seriously." This isn't temporary makeup. This is a lifetime commitment to looking appropriately godlike in all circumstances. Even your breath receives divine attention. You chew aromatic resins and herbs, not just for freshness, but because the Mesopotamians believed that words spoken through purified breath carried more spiritual weight. If you're going to address the gods, you want every syllable to arrive properly scented and ceremonially appropriate. You step back from your mirror and assess the total transformation. The person looking back is barely recognizable as the ordinary mortal who woke up this morning. You've become a living artwork, a human temple decorated according to divine specifications that have been passed down through generations of people who understood that beauty wasn't vanity, it was duty. Your neighbor arrives to escort you to the temple ceremony, and her reaction confirms that your transformation is complete. She looks at you with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious statues, because that's essentially what you've become. A mortal body prepared to serve as a vessel for divine communication through the ancient art of looking absolutely terrifying and magnificent simultaneously. The evening air feels different against your painted skin as you walk toward the temple complex. Every step reminds you that you're no longer just yourself. You're a representative of human devotion to divine beauty standards, walking proof that some people were willing to spend hours turning themselves into living artwork for the chance to speak with forces that shaped the cosmos and demanded nothing less than absolute aesthetic perfection. The Roman baths are steaming with waters that smell like heaven mixed with exotic spices, and you're about to lower yourself into what might be the most decadent bathing experience in human history. But this isn't just about getting clean. This is about transforming yourself into a work of art, using techniques that would make modern beauty gurus weep with envy and terror. You're following in the footsteps of Cleopatra herself, the queen who turned beauty into a weapon of mass seduction and accidentally created a beauty industry that would influence civilization for millennia. Cleopatra wasn't just the queen of eyeliner, though that thick black kohl was indeed her signature look, applied so dramatically that her eyes appeared to extend beyond her actual face into the realm of divine geometry. She was the poster child for Greco-Roman beauty obsession, and her influence reached into every wealthy household from Alexandria to Rome, like a beauty virus that infected the entire ancient world. You lower yourself into the milk bath that's been prepared according to Cleopatra's legendary specifications. Whether she actually bathed in the milk of 500 donkeys daily, or this was just ancient marketing hype, the truth remains. Lactic acid found in sour milk is a natural exfoliant that actually works. Roman women copied this technique enthusiastically, turning their bathhouses into dairy processing facilities for the cause of eternal youth. The milk feels strange against your skin, slippery, rich, and slightly warm from the addition of honey and rose petals that float around you like edible confetti. Elite Roman women spared no expense in their pursuit of the perfect complexion, believing that bathing in luxury ingredients would smooth wrinkles, lighten skin, and possibly grant them some of Cleopatra's legendary powers of persuasion. But the real transformation begins when you emerge from your milk bath and begin applying soothe, the white lead face powder that was the foundation of Roman beauty, literally and figuratively. This paste, made from white lead and vinegar, creates the ghostly pale complexion that signified wealth, status, and complete disregard for personal safety in the name of fashion. You apply the soothe with the careful precision of someone painting a masterpiece, because that's essentially what you're doing, turning your face into a canvas for Roman beauty ideals. The lead-based makeup gives you that flawless matte finish that photographs would love if cameras existed, but it's also slowly poisoning you with every application. Over time, it causes hair loss, skin damage, and eventual death. But looking like a goddess is apparently worth the trade-off. Historians still argue whether Roman women fully understood the toxic effects of their beauty products or simply accepted dangerous side effects as the price of social success. But what's certain is that looking pale and perfect was considered more important than minor concerns like long-term survival. The rouge application comes next. Crushed beetles, red ochre, or mulberry juice, creating vivid lips and cheeks that contrast dramatically with your ghostly white complexion. The more vivid your coloring, the more youthful and seductive you appeared, because Roman beauty theory held that strong contrasts created the most striking and memorable appearance. Your eyebrows receive special attention with soot mixed with animal fat, creating bold lines that frame your lead-whitened face with dramatic definition. Some women took this even further, completely removing their natural eyebrows and drawing new ones higher up on their foreheads to create the illusion of a larger, more intellectual-looking head. Hairstyling becomes its own engineering project as you curl your locks using heated metal rods, basically medieval curling irons that could brand you if handled carelessly. Roman women curled their hair into intricate architectural marvels that required structural planning and probably some knowledge of physics to maintain throughout the day. The hair color situation gets particularly interesting. Blonde hair was considered exotic and desirable, leading to a thriving industry in hair dyes made from herbs, ash, or, most memorably, fermented leeches. Yes, leeches. Roman women would apply leech-based hair treatments to achieve that fashionable Germanic blonde look that apparently required actual parasites as a key ingredient. For those who couldn't achieve the desired hair color through chemistry and aquatic bloodsuckers, wigs made from Germanic slave hair provided an alternative. These weren't just fashion accessories, they were status symbols that demonstrated your wealth and your commitment to achieving Roman beauty ideals regardless of cost or ethical considerations. The perfume application finale involves oils infused with saffron, cinnamon, and roses that cost more than most people's annual income. You rub these precious scents into every crease and surface of your body, creating an aromatic cloud that announces your presence before you even enter a room. Roman bathhouses smelled like botanical gardens dipped in liquid gold because subtlety was apparently not a Roman virtue. You examine your transformation in the polished bronze mirror and barely recognize yourself. The pale, dramatically colored person staring back looks like a living statue, beautiful, otherworldly, and slightly terrifying. You've successfully achieved the Roman beauty ideal that Cleopatra made famous. A look that says, I am too beautiful and too wealthy to be entirely human. The final touch involves a light dusting of pearl powder for extra luminosity, because apparently regular lead poisoning wasn't sufficient. You needed to add crushed sea creatures to really achieve that perfect Roman glow that signified divine favor and unlimited cosmetic budgets. Your jade roller feels cool against your skin as you move it slowly across your face in the early morning light, following patterns that have been passed down through your family for generations. But this isn't just skincare. This is philosophy in motion, a daily meditation on balance, harmony, and the understanding that true beauty flows from within, like a perfectly tuned instrument playing the music of cosmic order. Welcome to ancient Chinese beauty culture, where looking good was a moral obligation, and every cosmetic choice reflected your spiritual development. In ancient China, beauty wasn't flashy or attention-seeking like those gaudy Roman spectacles with their lid face paint and leech-based hair treatments. Chinese aesthetic philosophy prized balance, harmony, and inner qi. But don't mistake subtlety for simplicity, because the beauty rituals of dynastic China were just as rigorous, deeply spiritual, and occasionally shockingly intense as anything the Romans ever attempted. Your morning routine begins with examining your complexion in the bronze mirror, checking for any disruption in the pale, porcelain-like skin that symbolizes nobility, leisure, and spiritual refinement. Fair skin meant you were wealthy enough to avoid outdoor labor under harsh sunlight, while tanned skin suggested you worked in the fields like a peasant, which was absolutely unacceptable for someone of your social standing. The face powder you're applying contains ground pearls, powdered rice, and white lead, because apparently every ancient civilization decided that lead was an excellent cosmetic ingredient, despite its tendency to cause slow, agonizing death. But the Chinese approach to white lead powder was more sophisticated than the Roman method, often combined with medicinal formulas designed by court physicians who believed these treatments could boost qi and prolong life. Your jade roller isn't just a beauty tool. It's a spiritual instrument that connects you to concepts of immortality and cosmic harmony. Jade was believed to have mystical properties that could draw toxins from the skin while promoting circulation and reducing puffiness. Even emperors kept jade pillows, believing the stone would purify their skin while they slept and possibly grant them eternal life, which seems optimistic but harmless. The eyebrow situation in ancient China was serious business that reflected both fashion and politics. You're carefully shaping and painting your brows to match the current dynasty's preferred style, sometimes long and swooping, sometimes short and upward tilted, and occasionally removed entirely and redrawn higher on your forehead to create a more heavenly appearance that suggested spiritual elevation. Historians still argue whether eyebrow fashions were driven by aesthetic preferences or served as subtle political signals indicating loyalty to specific ruling dynasties. But what's certain is that having the wrong eyebrow shape could mark you as unfashionable or even politically suspect. Your lip color comes from a blend of cinnabar and animal fat, sometimes mixed with beeswax, to create a tint that ranges from subtle pink to dramatic red, depending on the occasion. The application technique requires precision. Chinese beauty ideals favored small, precisely shaped lips that suggested refinement and self-control rather than the bold, sensual mouth preferred in other cultures. Beauty marks weren't accidental features. They were carefully painted decorations using tiny black dots placed strategically near the lips or eyes. These artificial beauty marks were considered flirtatious symbols of charm and mystique, suggesting that the wearer possessed hidden depths and mysterious allure that couldn't be achieved through mere symmetry and proportion. Your hair care routine involves fermented rice water and camellia oil applied to locks that often grew down to your knees, a length that required serious commitment and probably some engineering knowledge to maintain. Elaborate updos, held in place with jade pins and golden combs, weren't just hairstyles. They were architectural achievements that declared your status, elegance, and cultural refinement to anyone within visual range. The grooming process becomes meditative as you work the camellia oil through your hair, section by section, while contemplating the philosophical principles that govern beauty and virtue. To ancient Chinese thinking, beauty wasn't loud or aggressive. It was meditative, disciplined, and symbolic of the harmony between inner cultivation and outer expression. Your rouge application follows the ancient principle of balance, with small circles of safflower petal powder dabbed precisely on your cheeks to suggest health and vitality without appearing overly dramatic or attention-seeking. Everything about Chinese beauty culture emphasized restraint, elegance, and the understanding that true attractiveness came from cultivating inner peace rather than external display. The fragrance oils you're applying have been carefully selected based on their supposed effects on qi and emotional balance. Jasmine for promoting tranquility, sandalwood for spiritual clarity, and lotus for purity. Each scent serving not just as perfume but as aromatherapy designed to align your energy with cosmic principles. You complete your beauty routine by checking that every element works together harmoniously. No single feature should dominate or call attention to itself. The goal is perfect balance, like a painting where every brushstroke contributes to the overall composition without overwhelming the viewer with individual drama. Your reflection in the bronze mirror shows someone who embodies ancient Chinese beauty ideals, serene, refined, and possessing the kind of quiet elegance that suggests deep inner cultivation. You haven't just applied makeup, you've created a living meditation on harmony, balance, and the understanding that true beauty reflects the condition of your soul rather than the skill of your cosmetic application. The morning sun streams through your window, illuminating skin that glows with the subtle radiance of pearl powder and spiritual contentment. You're ready to face the day as a representative of Chinese beauty philosophy, proof that looking good can be both an art form and a spiritual practice when approached with the proper understanding of cosmic harmony and really excellent jade tools. The courtyard of your Renaissance palazzo fills with the acrid smoke of heated metal as your beautician approaches with a glowing iron rod that looks more like a medieval torture device than a cosmetic tool. Your hair is already slick with a mixture of sulfur, soda, and lemon juice that burns your scalp with the intensity of liquid fire. But this is just the beginning of your transformation into Renaissance perfection. Today, you will achieve the ghostly pale complexion and golden locks that mark you as truly beautiful, even if the process might kill you. If ever there was a time when beauty literally murdered its practitioners, it was the Renaissance. In the courts of Italy, England, and France, women weren't just enhancing their appearance, they were slowly poisoning themselves in pursuit of an ideal that would make modern beauty standards look refreshingly healthy by comparison. The goal was simple: alabaster white skin with blood-red lips and high, delicate brows. The method was a chemical cocktail that would terrify a hazmat team. Your face has already been painted with Venetian ceruse, that luxurious paste made from white lead and vinegar that creates the bone-white finish favored by every fashionable woman in Europe. Under candlelight, it gives your skin a luminous, porcelain glow that makes you look like a living statue carved from the finest marble. But the downside involves skin corrosion, muscle paralysis, tooth decay, and eventual death from heavy metal poisoning. Queen Elizabeth I wore this deadly makeup religiously, transforming herself into the iconic Virgin Queen, whose white face became synonymous with English power and divine authority. But historical accounts suggest that by the end of her life, her skin was so damaged by lead poisoning that she couldn't smile properly, and her complexion had the texture of cracked plaster rather than human flesh. Your beauty routine continues with arsenic wafers, small pills that you swallow daily to achieve that coveted translucent complexion that suggests noble blood and refined sensibilities. These beauty pills supposedly brighten your skin from within, giving you an ethereal glow that can't be achieved through external makeup alone. They also cause vomiting, kidney damage, and internal bleeding, but beauty waits for no one, especially not your liver. The eyebrow situation requires dramatic intervention that would make modern beauty procedures seem gentle. You've plucked yours into thin arches, or removed them entirely, because a high, rounded forehead was fashionable and suggested intelligence and virtue. Some women shaved their hairlines back an inch or two to create the illusion of a larger brain, which somehow became synonymous with moral superiority and aesthetic appeal. Historians still argue whether Renaissance beauty standards were driven by genuine aesthetic preferences or reflected deeper anxieties about intelligence, virtue, and social status. But what's certain is that achieving the ideal look required serious commitment to cosmetic chemistry that could double as chemical warfare. Your cheek color comes from crushed cochineal bugs or vermilion mixed with mercury, because apparently the Renaissance response to any beauty challenge was add more toxic metals and see what happens. The mercury gives your rouge a particularly vibrant red that suggests youth, health, and vitality, while simultaneously attacking your nervous system and causing irreversible brain damage. Lip color follows the same philosophy of beauty through controlled poisoning, using mercury-based red dyes that create seductive pops of color while delivering nerve damage with every application. Your lips look absolutely stunning, like perfect crimson petals, but they're also slowly losing sensation and possibly preparing to file a formal complaint with your central nervous system. The fragrance component involves perfumes so strong they could be classified as biological weapons. Ambergris, musk, and civet create scents powerful enough to mask the unwashed reality beneath layers of toxic cosmetics, because bathing was still viewed with suspicion in many parts of Europe. You smell like a walking perfume factory that's having an identity crisis about whether it wants to attract suitors or repel plague demons. Your hair treatment reaches its climax as the heated metal rod approaches your sulfur-treated locks. The process of achieving those fashionable golden curls involves chemistry that could probably be used to manufacture explosives, but the results are undeniably striking. Your hair takes on the bright blonde color associated with angels, nobility, and people who can afford to slowly destroy their scalps in pursuit of celestial appearance. The wide-brimmed hat with the cutout top allows sun exposure only to your hair, while protecting your lead-painted face from UV radiation that could compromise your toxic makeup application. It's like having a medieval sun hat designed specifically for controlled chemical hair processing, which sounds insane, but was actually standard equipment for fashionable Renaissance women. You examine your reflection in the polished metal mirror and barely recognize the ethereal creature staring back. Your skin has the luminous white perfection of fresh snow, your lips glow like rubies, and your golden hair catches the light like spun silk. You've achieved Renaissance beauty perfection. You look like a goddess descended from heaven to grace mortal courts with divine beauty. But beneath this stunning exterior, your body is slowly succumbing to the cumulative effects of lead, mercury, arsenic, and whatever other toxic elements you've applied in the name of fashion. You're a walking masterpiece of cosmetic art that's simultaneously a medical disaster waiting to happen, which perfectly encapsulates the Renaissance approach to beauty. Absolutely stunning and completely unsustainable. The price of perfection has never been higher, literally or figuratively. But as you prepare to make your entrance at tonight's court gathering, you know that every eye will be drawn to your flawless appearance. Whether you'll survive long enough to enjoy your beauty is another question entirely, but tonight, you are magnificent.